MLB offseason is over and spring training is officially here. Now with that said, how did teams do this offseason in terms of accomplishing what they sought out to do? In this video, I'm going to be covering the National League teams and their offseason grades, and in my previous video I did the AL teams if you want to go check that out. But if you do appreciate the content I provide, maybe you can give me a like and subscribe. With that said, let's get into these offseason grades, and like my last video, I'm going to go in alphabetical order by their cities. So that starts us with the Arizona Diamondbacks, and I'm giving them an A. Fresh off a World Series appearance, the Diamondbacks applied pressure to the rest of baseball with their moves. Adding Eduardo Rodriguez, Eugenio Suarez, and Jock Peterson were all good moves. Seeing as their payroll isn't the highest, I really respect teams that get creative for the best way to address their needs. The NL West is competitive, but you can count on the Diamondbacks being in that race. And while they did lose Tommy Pham and Evan Longoria, I think they did more than enough to cover for it. Next up, we have the Atlanta Braves, and I'm giving them a B+. I think all things considered, the Braves have just everything they needed. Although it was a very weird process for them to get there, with them doing salary dumps and roster shuffling to meet all of their needs. Their bullpen has been upgraded with the likes of Renato Lopez and Aaron Bummer. I really like the move of buying low on Jared Kelenic, as he showed flashes of greatness. The only thing stopping them from being in the A's for me is the risk of investing into Chris Sale, as he hasn't been able to stay too healthy for the last few years. He pitched in 2023 and showed flashes that he still has stuff left in the tank, but we will see if he can stay healthy and contribute to the Braves, and if he does, his offseason grade deserves an A. But it depends on Chris Sale for me with the Braves. And also with trading for Chris Sale, they gave up Vaughn Grissom, and with him not being able to be a full-time shortstop, he didn't really have a future in Atlanta with Ozzie Albies being here. So it made sense for the Braves to trade him. Next up, we have the Chicago Cubs, and I'm giving them a D+. Cubs had all the momentum in the world coming into the offseason, and I don't think they have capitalized on it like they should be. While they added Shota Imagana, Hector Neris, and upside with Michael Busch, I just think they should have either committed money to Rhys Hoskins to be their first baseman, or go long-term with Cody Bellinger, or even both. But if the Cubs are going to reach the potential and capabilities they have, one of those two moves would have been ideal. There's still time for them to sign Cody Bellinger, but as of now, this offseason is a big letdown to me for the Cubs. For the Cincinnati Reds, I'm going to give them an A-. The Reds made strides in 2023, and unlike some teams that sat on their ass, they was like, let's improve this roster and see what we can do. Adding Jeimer Candelario, Nick Martinez, and Frank Montes is what you do when you've accumulated some nice young talent on the roster. The Reds should be able to compete in the NL Central with these moves, and that's about all you can ask for, and this season will show if they are finally competing, close to competing, or was last year's fool's gold. Next up, we have the Colorado Rockies, and I'm giving them a flat-out F. I just feel sorry for the Rockies and their fans. The Rockies really haven't cared since stupidly giving Chris Bryant that contract while they was still rebuilding, and now he's one of the worst contracts in baseball. Add that up with an awful return they got for Nolan Arenado, and you wonder why this roster is devout of talent and hope. They just exist, and with every other team in the NL West taking steps forwards besides the Padres, it might only continue to get worse. Munford ownership should be ashamed of themselves. What they do to these fans that consistently support a god-awful team, it's just a damn shame. After the Colorado Rockies, we have the Los Angeles Dodgers, and I'm giving them an A+. Dodgers had one of the best off seasons ever. Adding Ohtani, Yamamoto, Glasnow, and Teoscar Hernandez, what else can you say? For their sake, they better not come up short in the playoffs again, or it's only going to continue to be more embarrassing. But yeah, best offseason in a long time, and they show once again that they are the new evil empire in baseball. After the Los Angeles Dodgers, we have the Miami Marlins, who is getting an F. Another franchise that I feel bad for, the Miami Marlins. They had a surprise postseason appearance run, and what did they do with it? Absolutely nothing. The opportunity was right there for the Marlins to apply pressure on the rest of the NL East, and they didn't. They are closer to the Mets than they are the Braves and Phillies, and this blame falls on cheap ownership that don't want to spend what it takes to win. They just signed Tim Anderson today to a one-year $5 million deal, but that still doesn't move the needle for me because he was one of the worst hitters in baseball last year, and it'll be great for the Marlins if he returns to form, but after a season like that, you have to see it to believe it. So that's a move to me for a team that's not trying to compete, and for the fact they didn't find a competent DH replacement for Jorge Soler. I just don't love what Miami is doing. Next up, we have the Milwaukee Brewers, and I'm giving them a D. Another team that had a bad offseason, the Milwaukee Brewers. I like the Rhys Hoskins move as it's an upgrade that they needed needed in offense. I also get trading Corbin Burnes, but I felt like their return wasn't enough. So if they were going to trade him, maybe they should have traded him with 2 years of control left so you can get a proper bounty for one of the best pitchers in baseball. It just doesn't seem like the best return on investment for a team that knows it has a lower payroll. The extension of Jackson Chourio is good, but also Willy Adames is a pending free agent, so why not move him like you did Corbin Burnes? With all of this said, the Brewers will still compete in the NL Central, but I think they've been better off if they plan what to do with Burnes and Adames sooner, because not maximizing on your assets is going to hurt you long term. With the New York Mets, I'm going to give them a C-. The Mets spending all of this money to still not be on the Braves Phillies levels is kind of pathetic, but also they have been committed to the retool and not adding long-term financial burden. They were in on Yamamoto, but I understand doing that. But signing Sean Manaea and Luis Severino for the rotation is fine to see if they can get more out of them, and at worst case they can eat some innings. The reason I have the Mets at C- though, I think they are choosing to ignore the elephant in the room with Pete Alonso. I get that he's a Boras guy, so an extension is most likely not happening, but I feel if that's the case, the Mets should have made the tough decision to move Alonso. As of now, the Mets are showing at best case scenario they are a wild card type team, but more than likely they will be a team on the outside looking in. If you don't think you can sign Pete long term, you should move him, because if you don't sign him long term and only get draft pick compensation, that's a big fail on the Mets part. So it's a wait and see, but I feel like the Mets are potentially burning themselves with how they are dealing with Pete Alonso. With the Philadelphia Phillies, I'm going to give them an offseason grade of B. The Phillies kept Aaron Nola. Knowing that the Atlanta Braves were pursuing Aaron Nola as well, that was an important task for them to keep him. We already know the Phillies are capable of winning with their recent postseason success, and they are betting on that as well. They also just added Whit Merrifield as a super utility player, and while they didn't make many moves, they didn't have to make that many moves in the first place, and the ones they did was good. So that's why they have an offseason grade of B. So next up is the Pittsburgh Pirates, and I was prepared to give the Pirates a bad grade, but they did some saving grace with their extension of Mitch Keller, signing a 5-year, $77 million extension on February 22nd, so I'm going to give them a C. Now with long-term commitments to Ke'Bryan Hayes, Bryan Reynolds, and Keller, it's nice to see the Pirates finally invest in some of their youth. But we still can't ignore that the Pirates won 76 games, and with them only adding Rowdy Tellez, Martin Perez, Marco Gonzalez, and Yasmani Grandal, it isn't enough to move the needle. So given that, I can't go higher than a C. Unfortunately, Andy Rodriguez needs Tommy John surgery and is out for the 2024 season. That's why they needed to sign Yasmani Grandal to be a full-time catcher. I wanted to add that context. And I wouldn't be surprised to see them finish in the same place they were as last year, but it's also good to see the Pirates spend on their young players like I said before. Next up, I have the San Diego Padres, and I have to give them a D. Padres were running their franchise like it was a baseball simulation, and there was no repercussion for long-term goals. After missing the playoffs and losing money on the season, Padres had to cut back. They traded Juan Soto to the Yankees. It was the right move to make as they weren't going to be able to sign him long-term, and they added arms to the rotation in Michael King, but they also lost Josh Hader and are not expected to re-sign Blake Snell. Their plan next year is to shorten game with their off-season relief pitcher additions, but the Padres already weren't that special, winning 82 games last year, and losing Juan Soto, Blake Snell, and Josh Hader, 2024 could potentially be looking rougher for the Padres. But I feel like this offseason for them was a combination of them not planning for the future right, and they're dealing with the aftermath of that. With the San Francisco Giants, I'm giving them an offseason grade of B-. The Giants were offering money last offseason, so I figured they was going to continue to do that, but safe to say the Giants did it, but not in the way most thought. I like the Jorge Soler and Jung-Ho Lee signings, but where the Giants are lower and not higher on my list, they needed to add a top of the rotation starter. And converting Jordan Hicks from reliever to starter isn't enough, and while they also added Robbie Ray, who won't be there until the middle of the year, it felt like Blake Snell or Jordan Montgomery would have been ideal. They had interest in Yamamoto. The Dodgers and Yankees were the final two there. The Giants should be able to compete for the playoffs, but they low-key dropped the ball not adding a top of the rotation starting pitcher. With the St. Louis Cardinals, I'm gonna give them an off-season grade of C+. The Cardinals is a definition of addressing your needs, but I don't think they addressed them well. With Jordan Montgomery a pending free agent and him being a Scott Boras client, the Cardinals decided to pivot to Sonny Gray, Kyle Gibson, and Lance Lynn. I love the Sonny Gray move, that was smart, but giving one-year deals to Gibson and Lance Lynn to round out the rotation, I just don't think that was the best use of their assets. They added 3 pitchers over the age of 34. That doesn't seem feasible to expect all of them to stay healthy for a full year. And when you keep Keep in mind, they are counting on a 35-year-old Miles Michaelis and a 32-year-old Steven Matz. There's not much room for upside with this rotation. The better move to me would have been trading for a cost-controlled starting pitcher and using the $20 million that you used on Gibson/Lynn to get a starting pitcher that has a little bit more upside. I felt that would have been a better use of their resources. So while they did address their needs, I don't like how they did it. So they end up at a C+ and not in the B range. The last team in the National League is the Washington Nationals, and I'm giving them an off-season grade of C. The Nationals are in a long rebuild right now, so they are doing what they do best. Buy low on players that once had high praise and hope to see if they can figure it out with the Nationals with less pressure on them, and if they do well, they could be moved to the trade deadline for assets. Those players this year being Joey Gallo, Nick Senzel, and Dylan Floro. Even if none of these players work out, what it really comes down to for the Nationals is, do their top prospects take the next step so they can feel comfortable enough to spend and compete in the tough NL East? So yeah, their off season really wasn't nothing to speak about. It wasn't awful, it wasn't bad. That's why I have them at a C. So y'all let me know in the comment section, how do you feel about my off-season grades? Do you agree with them? Is there something you disagree with? Do you think there was a team I was too critical on? Do you think there was a team I was way too nice with? I would love to hear that feedback in the comment section. If you've made it to this point, I appreciate you, and I hope you stay tuned for the next video that I have for you.